June 2007, Port of Melbourne. A shipping container arrives from Naples, Italy, manifest listed as a routine commercial import. Inside, stacked in neat rows, are thousands of tomato tins. Nothing unusual about that. Australia imports Italian tomatoes constantly. Except these tins aren't full of tomatoes. Customs officers open one, then another, then another. Inside, packed tight instead of San Marzano tomatoes, are ecstasy pills. By the time they finish counting, they have 15,193,798 tablets in front of them. 4.423 tons of pure MDMA, hidden inside 3,000 tomato tins. It's the largest single ecstasy seizure ever recorded anywhere in the world, with a wholesale value estimated at $122 million, and a street value some reports put closer to $500 million. Here's what nobody involved knew yet, not the smugglers, not even most of the police working the case. The reason this shipment got caught wasn't a lucky customs officer with a good eye. It was a woman sitting inside the defense table of an unrelated drug trial that same year, secretly working for the other side. A barrister, the lawyer for one of the men who organized this exact shipment. This is the story of the tomato tins plot and the betrayal buried inside it that nobody saw coming. To understand who built this operation, you need to go back 30 years before the tins ever left Naples. Griffith, New South Wales, a quiet riverina farming town that became, in the 1970s, the epicenter of Australia's marijuana trade, run largely by Australians of Calabrian heritage with deep ties back to the 'Ndrangheta, the Calabrian mafia. In 1977, a local businessman named Donald Mackay publicly blew the whistle on the town's drug trade. He vanished soon after, presumed murdered, his body never found. The 1979 Woodward Royal Commission that followed exposed just how deeply organised crime had embedded itself in regional Australia, and Griffith's name became permanently linked to the Calabrian mafia's presence in the country. Pasquale Barbaro grew up in that world. By the mid-2000s, police allege he had become the head of a syndicate connected to the same Calabrian networks that had run Griffith decades earlier, except now operating on an international scale, moving drugs between Italy and Australia through legitimate-looking freight shipments. Barbaro needed a logistics man, someone who understood freight, shipping documentation, and how to get a container quietly through the port of Melbourne. That man was Rob Karam. The tomato tins weren't Karam's first brush with a massive ecstasy import. Back in 2005, Karam was charged over an earlier attempt to smuggle 5 million ecstasy pills, worth an estimated $300 million. To beat the rap, he hired one of Melbourne's rising criminal barristers, a woman named Nicola Gobbo. By June 2007, Karam was sitting in a Melbourne courtroom fighting for his freedom in that 2005 case. He trusted Gobbo completely. What he didn't know was that while Gobbo was defending him in front of a jury, she was living a double life. She had already registered as a secret police informer. Right in the middle of his trial, Karam handed his trusted lawyer the shipping documents for his new venture, the tomato tins. Gobbo walked those papers straight to her police handlers. A month later, in July 2007, Karam was acquitted of the 2005 charges and walked free, celebrating a massive legal victory with the lawyer who had already quietly sealed his fate. While Karam was still technically her client, and while she was defending him in that earlier trial, he began confiding in her about a new operation, a much bigger one. Gobbo would later tell police handlers that Karam gave her a shipping cargo receipt to hold onto, initially telling her the container held tobacco. When she pressed him further, he admitted it was, in his words, a bit of this, a bit of that. Eventually, he told her outright, 15 million pills. Gobbo copied the documents. She translated the Italian shipping details herself, and she handed all of it to her Victoria police handlers, who passed the intelligence anonymously to the Australian Federal Police and Customs. That bill of lading became what prosecutors later called the foundation piece of evidence in the entire case. Without it, investigators may never have known which container out of thousands moving through the port of Melbourne to actually search. The syndicate wasn't purely Calabrian. Among those swept up in the investigation was John William Samuel Higgs, founder of the Melbourne chapter of the Black Uhlans, one of Australia's oldest outlaw motorcycle clubs, and a man once regarded by police as the country's leading amphetamine trafficker, going back to a 1996 arrest. A former senior organized crime investigator explained why Higgs's involvement mattered so much to police watching the case unfold. In the 1970s, the Calabrian mafia in Australia was rigidly traditional, insular, and family-only. The idea of doing business with an outside bikie gang would have been unthinkable. By the 2000s, that had completely changed. The syndicate had become willing to do business with anyone who could move product and keep their mouth shut. Calabrians, Lebanese logistics men like Karam, and now outlaw bikies, all working the same supply chain. The AFP's plan was standard for a case like this. By conducting a controlled delivery, swap the pills for something harmless, reseal the container, and watch who came to collect it. It only worked if the syndicate's fake paperwork functioned as intended. That paperwork listed a phone number for the freight forwarding company to call once the container cleared customs, a number that rang straight through to the gang. A Melbourne freight forwarding manager had that exact call to make. Instead of dialing the number on the page, she Googled the company's name and called the number on her own screen instead, reaching the real, entirely innocent business the syndicate had impersonated. They told her they'd never imported any tomatoes. She had the container unloaded and sent back. That one decision killed the controlled delivery before it started. Nobody from the syndicate ever came to collect it. Detective Superintendent Matt Warren, who ran the investigation, said it plainly afterward. Had she called the fake number instead, the syndicate would have shown up and police would have arrested whoever did the unpacking and nothing more. Instead, the AFP was left holding 15 million pills they couldn't announce, and a syndicate that had simply lost contact with its own shipment. They had no choice but to go quiet and play a longer game. The AFP got lucky in one way. Barbaro's phone was already tapped from a separate investigation, and Victoria Police already had Higgs under watch. Neither had anything to do with the tomato tins yet, but that was about to change. For weeks, the syndicate held out hope the pills were still theirs, suspecting but not confirming they'd been seized. By mid-July, Barbaro accepted the worst and flew to Calabria to deliver the news to his suppliers. He came back a month later, owing $10 million, split with his South Australian partner, Carmelo Falanga, $5 million each. That debt forced his hand. He couldn't sit back anymore, and every move he made to raise the money happened under surveillance that was already running. Between late 2007 and early 2008, the syndicate trafficked a follow-up batch of 1.2 million ecstasy tablets. By mid-2008, Barbaro and his cousin, Severio Zerilli, went further, arranging just under 100 kilograms of Colombian cocaine smuggled in through a container of coffee beans. Customs caught it anyway. Desperate to know whether the original shipment was truly gone, Barbaro made the decision that would define the rest of his life. On September 19, 2007, he texted a Melbourne newspaper journalist directly, hoping to either learn the truth or, if the seizure really had happened, get it publicly reported so he could prove to his suppliers he hadn't stolen the pills himself. His message read, "Mate, I have info on a drug shipment gone wrong. Will you chase it up, as I'm afraid to tell police of fear they might be involved?" The container came in on the ship Monica 2 months ago, and it is 15 million ecstasy tabs in tomato tins. Why isn't it out? It's the biggest in history. The journalist gave him nothing, but that message became one of the most damning pieces of evidence in his eventual trial. Justice Betty King referenced it directly when she sentenced him, telling him he had clearly been trying to make the seizure public, specifically to convince his overseas suppliers he hadn't ripped them off. With no answer from the press, Barbaro turned to his own contacts on the docks and confirmed through them that the AFP almost certainly had the shipment. Once the syndicate grew suspicious, their phones were tapped. Several senior members arranged to meet in person instead, specifically to talk somewhere they thought was safe from surveillance. The AFP had the park wired before they arrived. Sitting at that table, Barbaro told an associate he'd already warned Rob Karam he'd pay what he owed, either in money or with his life. Higgs made his own contribution too, caught on tape, saying he wanted to wrap the man he blamed for losing the shipment in carpet and throw him in the river.
By August 2008, the AFP had what it needed. Just after 4 a.m. on August 8th, agents raided the Carlton apartment and found Barbaro in bed. Arrests rolled out across the country that same day and in the weeks after, eventually reaching 33 people. Gang members had been watched by surveillance officers for over 10,000 hours. The AFP had secretly recorded 185,215 phone conversations between them. More than 400 AFP members had been involved before the arrest phase alone. Barbaro pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life with a minimum of 30 years, one of the longest sentences ever handed down in Australia for a drug offence. Zurilli, his cousin and right-hand man, got 26 years with an 18-year minimum. Karam was sentenced to 19 years with a 15-year minimum for the tomato tins alone, before further charges added more time on top. Higgs got 18 years with a 14-year minimum. Falanga, who'd financed the shipment alongside Barbaro, got 23 years. Visser, the only one who fought it at trial, claiming he thought it was smuggled tobacco, got 11 years anyway. For over a decade, none of the convicted men knew exactly how deep Nicola Gobbo's betrayal actually ran. Then, in 2019, her identity as a long-term registered police informant, known publicly as Lawyer X, was formally revealed, and Victoria was forced to call a royal commission, specifically to investigate how deeply her double life had corrupted the justice system. Gobbo herself later ranked helping police crack the tomato tins shipment as the single most significant arrest of her entire career as an informant. The commission heard she continued representing multiple clients in court even while actively feeding police information about their crimes behind closed doors, and that when the AFP arrested Karam, they specifically warned him Gobbo could no longer represent him due to a conflict of interest, without ever telling him why. Every major figure convicted through evidence traced back to her. Karam, Higgs, Barbaro, and several others launched appeals arguing the same thing, that being secretly informed on by your own defense lawyer isn't a technicality. It's a complete collapse of the right to a fair trial. Higgs, now approaching 80 and still behind bars, has spent years fighting simply to be granted bail while his appeal crawls through the courts. 15 years later, the world's largest ecstasy bust is still, technically, an open legal question. Men sentenced to decades in prison are still arguing in Victorian courtrooms that the case that put them there was rotten from the moment their own lawyer picked up the phone.